My name is Isabella Jones. I am 30 years old. On the night of my 30th birthday, my father stood up in a crowded Napa Valley restaurant, raised his glass to a 25-year-old stranger, and said, "To the daughter who never disappointed me." My mother sat frozen at the table, her eyes welling with tears. I did not throw my drink in his face. I did not scream. I calmly picked up my work laptop, bypassed the restaurant audio system, and played a highly classified intercepted voicemail over the main speakers for every single patron to hear. Before I tell you how I dismantled my father's pristine Silicon Valley empire, take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to Savage Revenge Stories, and drop a comment telling me your age and where you are watching from right now. The evening sun dipped behind the rolling hills of wine country, casting a warm golden glow over the outdoor patio. We sat at a reclaimed wood table inside an exclusive farm-to-table restaurant. The air smelled of roasted garlic, charred rosemary, and expensive aged oak. The dining room hummed with the quiet, confident chatter of venture capitalists and vineyard owners enjoying the mild California evening. It was supposed to be a private celebration for my milestone birthday. I had driven up from my apartment in San Francisco, expecting a quiet dinner with my parents. My father, Richard, commanded our table. He built his wealth as a ruthless tech investor in Palo Alto, treating every human interaction like a hostile corporate takeover. He wore a custom-tailored suit and checked his imported watch every few minutes, projecting his usual impatient aura. He always viewed my career as a cybersecurity analyst with clear disdain. He invested in disruptive software and considered my job of protecting digital infrastructure to be the work of a glorified digital janitor. My mother, Sarah, sat beside him looking small and delicate. She came from old California money, inheriting a highly coveted generational vineyard in Sonoma. She spent her 35-year marriage shrinking under my father's domineering shadow, preferring to keep the peace rather than voice her own opinions. She kept her eyes focused on her linen napkin, avoiding the thick tension radiating across the table. That tension stemmed from the fourth person sitting with us. Richard did not bring me a birthday gift. He brought an uninvited guest. Her name was Vanessa. She was 25 years old, wearing a sleek designer dress that cost more than my monthly rent. My father introduced her to us as his brilliant new protégé, claiming she was spearheading a revolutionary new startup he was personally funding. She sat across from me, offering a practiced, radiant smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She carried herself with an unearned familiarity, ordering the most expensive items on the menu and resting her hand casually on my father's arm whenever she spoke. I spent the first hour of my birthday dinner watching a stranger monopolize the conversation. Richard directed all his attention toward Vanessa, praising her innovative business strategies and sharp intellect. Whenever I attempted to speak about a recent promotion I secured at my firm, he would wave his hand and shift the topic back to Vanessa's latest achievements. I watched my mother shrink further into her seat, pushing her roasted vegetables around her plate in defeated silence. The waiter approached our table carrying a bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. He poured the dark red wine into our crystal glasses. Richard stood up, buttoning his suit jacket and raising his glass high into the air. The surrounding tables quieted down, assuming they were about to witness a touching family tribute. "I want to propose a toast," Richard announced, his booming voice carrying across the patio. Building a legacy in the tech world requires vision, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. It requires the kind of drive that is increasingly rare these days. I picked up my glass, expecting a backhanded compliment wrapped in a standard birthday greeting. Richard turned his body entirely away from me. He looked down at the young woman sitting to his right. To Vanessa, my father declared a wide, proud smile spreading across his face. To the brilliant mind carrying my vision into the future. To the daughter who never disappointed me. The clinking of silverware in the dining room stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah let out a sharp, ragged gasp. A single tear escaped her eye, tracing a path down her pale cheek. She stared at her husband in pure, profound shock. Vanessa offered a modest, glowing smile and gently clinked her glass against his. She did not look embarrassed. She looked victorious. I set my glass down on the wooden table. I am a cybersecurity analyst. My entire professional life revolves around identifying threats, isolating vulnerabilities, and neutralizing hostile actors. I spend my days protecting sensitive corporate data from external attacks. In that defining moment, I realized the greatest threat to my family was sitting at the head of my own table. I did not excuse myself to cry in the restroom. I reached down to the floor and unzipped my leather messenger bag. I pulled out my sleek silver work laptop and set it directly on top of the crisp white tablecloth, pushing my dinner plate aside. Richard frowned, lowering his glass. "Put that away, Isabella," he ordered, his tone laced with heavy irritation. "We are in the middle of a toast. It is incredibly rude to work at the dinner table." I did not answer him. I opened the laptop screen, bringing the device out of sleep mode. My fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced, lethal precision. High-end restaurants often utilize commercial wireless audio systems to pipe their ambient music through the dining room and outdoor patio. They also notoriously fail to change the default administrator passwords on those specific network devices. I opened a command terminal and scanned the local radio frequencies. I identified the primary broadcasting receiver located near the host stand. It took me less than 45 seconds to spoof the network credentials and override the primary firewall. I hijacked the audio output, routing my laptop directly into the restaurant sound system. "What are you doing?" Vanessa asked, her confident smile faltering as she watched the rapid lines of code scrolling across my dark screen. I accessed a hidden encrypted folder on my desktop. 3 days prior, my automated security sweep flagged an anomalous audio file routed through a compromised cloud server connected to my father's firm. I had intercepted a private voicemail, and I had been waiting for the right moment to decipher its true meaning. Richard had just provided the perfect stage. I secured the audio connection. The soft jazz music playing over the restaurant speakers abruptly cut out. I looked up from my screen, locking my eyes onto my father's confused face. "I am giving a toast of my own," I replied. I pressed the spacebar. I unleashed a public execution that would shatter the pristine illusion of our family and launch a digital war that would change the trajectory of our lives forever. The sudden silence in the restaurant was heavy and absolute. Dozens of affluent patrons lowered their forks, turning their heads to locate the source of the audio interruption. The crisp crackle of digital static echoed through the high-fidelity speakers mounted above the patio. Then Richard's unmistakable booming voice filled the dining room. Vanessa, the recording played carrying the distinct, slightly muffled audio quality of a mobile voicemail. "The paperwork is officially finalized. I pushed the transfer through the county clerk's office this morning. Sarah never checks the property ledgers." I lifted her signature from the old tax filings and mirrored it perfectly on the deed assignment. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. "The Sonoma Vineyard is now legally sheltered under your holding company," Richard continued boasting into the recorded void, oblivious to the fact that his arrogant confession was now broadcasting to 50 strangers. "We bypassed the marital asset restrictions completely. The developers are ready to move on the land the moment we clear the zoning hurdles. I will see you at dinner." I hit the spacebar, severing the audio connection. The heavy silence rushed back into the room, but the damage was irreversible. A collective gasp rippled across the patio. A woman at a neighboring table covered her mouth, staring openly at my father in sheer horror. Richard sat frozen. The confident, arrogant tech investor who just toasted a stranger over his own flesh and blood was completely shattered. He stared at my laptop screen, his eyes wide with a panicked primal terror. He realized in a fraction of a second that his invisible, disappointing daughter had just weaponized his own technology against him. "Turn that off," Richard hissed, his voice barely a raspy whisper. He lunged across the reclaimed wood table, knocking over his crystal wine glass. The dark red Cabernet spilled across the pristine white linen, soaking into the fabric like blood. He slammed the lid of my laptop shut, but his aggressive action was entirely futile. The message had already been delivered. Vanessa shrank back in her chair, the polished, radiant smile wiped completely from her face. She looked frantically around the patio, realizing she was sitting in the epicenter of a massive public scandal. I did not raise my voice or react to my father's sudden lunge. I calmly unlatched the power cord, pulled the laptop toward me, and slid it back into my leather messenger bag. I zipped the bag shut with a sharp, definitive sound that cut through the lingering tension at our table. I turned to my mother. Sarah was trembling, her hands gripping the edges of her chair. She spent 35 years playing the role of the dutiful silent wife, believing her inherited wealth and her quiet compliance provided a safe harbor for our family. She endured his harsh temper and his condescending remarks to maintain the peace. Now she was forced to confront the devastating reality that her husband had systematically stolen her most prized generational asset to fund a younger woman. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm, "we are leaving." I stood up and walked around the table, holding out my hand. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears of betrayal and profound shock. She reached out, placing her trembling hand in mine. I helped her stand, steadying her against the sudden dizziness of her shattered reality. Richard grabbed my wrist, his grip tight and frantic. "Isabella, you do not understand," he pleaded, his voice dropping into a desperate low register. "It is a complex corporate maneuver. I was protecting the vineyard from tax liabilities. You are taking this entirely out of context." I pulled my arm free, breaking his grip with a sharp downward motion. "Do not touch me," I commanded, locking my eyes onto his panicked face. "You stole her inheritance, and you bragged about it to the woman you are funding. There is no context that saves you from that." I guided my mother away from the table. We walked across the patio, navigating through the sea of staring diners. I did not look back. I left Richard standing over a ruined tablecloth, scrambling to pay a massive dinner bill, while trying to appease a crowd of wealthy locals who had just witnessed a masterclass in marital fraud. The cool evening air of the Napa Valley offered a sharp, refreshing contrast to the suffocating tension of the restaurant. We reached my car parked near the edge of the gravel lot. I helped my mother into the passenger seat, ensuring her seatbelt was secure before sliding behind the steering wheel. I started the engine and merged onto the highway, heading south toward the sprawling tech hub of Silicon Valley. The drive was long and quiet. I kept my eyes focused on the winding, dark roads, allowing my mind to shift gears into a purely analytical state. I spent my professional life hunting external hackers, mitigating ransomware attacks, and building secure firewalls for major tech firms in San Francisco. My job required me to anticipate threats and lock down vulnerable data before the attackers could extract value. I always assumed my corporate skills were separate from my personal life. Tonight, those two worlds collided with devastating force. My biggest adversary was not an anonymous hacker operating out of a foreign basement. It was the man who raised me. Richard did not just execute a sloppy real estate transfer. He engaged in premeditated forgery, attempting to strip my mother of the property her family had owned for 3 generations. The Sonoma Vineyard was not just a plot of land, it was Sarah's legacy. If he was willing to steal that, he was undoubtedly preparing to seize the rest of her liquid assets. I needed to initiate a total financial lockdown before he realized the depth of my digital capabilities. "We need to secure your accounts, Mom," I said, breaking the long silence as we navigated the twisting curves of the Pacific Coast Highway. "We are going straight to the Palo Alto house. We are going to pull your physical banking ledgers, locate the original deed documents, and I am going to freeze every single joint account you share with him." Sarah nodded slowly, staring blankly out the passenger window at the dark, rushing ocean. "He took it, Isabella," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the realization. "He took my father's vineyard. He gave it to her. We will get it back," I promised, my grip tightening on the leather steering wheel. "I am going to tear his digital life apart." We crossed the Golden Gate Bridge and drove down into the affluent, manicured streets of Palo Alto. My parents lived in a sprawling, modern estate nestled behind high privacy walls and automated security gates. The property was heavily integrated with smart home technology, a standard feature for prominent tech investors in the valley. Richard controlled the primary administrative access for the estate's security systems, but I retained secondary access credentials to bypass the gates when I visited. I turned onto the quiet, tree-lined street approaching the massive wrought iron gates of the family home. I reached up and pressed the integrated garage door opener mounted to my sun visor. Nothing happened. I frowned, pressing the button a second time, holding it down firmly. The heavy iron gates remained perfectly still, refusing to part. I pulled the car up to the digital keypad mounted on the stone pillar. I rolled down my window and typed in my personal 6-digit access code. The small LCD screen flashed a harsh red light, emitting a sharp negative beep. The display text read, "Access denied. User profile unrecognized." A cold spike of adrenaline hit my chest. I pulled my phone from my bag and opened the smart home application connecting directly to the estate's wireless network. The application demanded a fresh administrative login. My saved credentials were rejected. My mother looked over at me, the panic returning to her eyes. "What is wrong, Isabella? Why will the gates not open?" I stared at the red, flashing light on the keypad, the reality of the situation settling over me with terrifying clarity. We did not surprise Richard at the restaurant. He had anticipated a confrontation long before I played the voicemail. He had already prepared his defenses. "He locked us out," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He wiped my access codes. We were sitting in a running car outside the fortress my mother owned, unable to cross the threshold. Richard did not just steal a vineyard. He had initiated a total aggressive lockout, ensuring we could not access the physical documents required to fight him. The conflict had escalated from a public dinner confrontation into a high-stakes digital siege, and we were currently trapped on the wrong side of the wall. The red warning light on the security keypad blinked mockingly in the dark, an unmistakable signal that our physical access to the Palo Alto estate was entirely severed. I put the car in reverse, backing slowly away from the imposing wrought iron gates. I merged back onto the quiet, affluent street, my mind racing through the immediate logistical nightmare. We could not call the local police. Without physical copies of the property deed or utility bills proving my mother's current residency, the officers would simply classify this as a civil domestic dispute and refuse to force entry. Richard counted on that exact bureaucratic hesitation. "We need a place to sleep, Mom," I said, keeping my voice calm to prevent her from spiraling further into panic. "I am going to find a hotel. We will deal with the house tomorrow." I pulled my phone from the center console and opened a travel booking application. I found a modest roadside motel situated near a busy commercial intersection in San Jose, offering no frills but immediate availability. I typed in my payment credentials to secure the reservation, but the application threw a harsh error message. "Card declined. Contact your financial institution." I frowned, navigating to my mobile banking application. The interface loaded, revealing a stark, terrifying reality. My primary checking account, which was previously linked to my parents' family trust for emergency overdraft protection, displayed a zero balance. I checked my mother's joint credit card profiles. Every single account was flagged as frozen or suspended due to suspicious activity. "He drained the accounts," I whispered, staring at the glowing screen. "He froze the credit lines." Sarah let out a small, defeated gasp, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "He is trying to starve us out, Isabella. He wants us to come crawling back to him. He is utilizing a classic corporate siege tactic. He isolated our resources, attempting to force a rapid, unconditional surrender. He assumed that without access to her affluent lifestyle or liquid capital, my mother would simply fold, returning to the estate to accept whatever humiliating terms he dictated. He underestimated the resilience of a woman pushed to the absolute edge, and he fundamentally misunderstood the capabilities of the daughter sitting behind the steering wheel. I routed the vehicle to the San Jose motel, utilizing a backup corporate credit card issued by my cybersecurity firm to cover the nightly rate. The room was dingy, smelling faintly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap industrial cleaner. The thin floral bedspreads and the flickering neon sign outside the window provided a jarring contrast to the luxurious Napa Valley restaurant we occupied just a few hours prior. Sarah sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, looking incredibly small and fragile. I poured her a glass of tap water from the bathroom sink, handing it to her before claiming the small particle board desk in the corner of the room. I unzipped my messenger bag and pulled out my silver work laptop. I plugged the power adapter into a loose wall outlet and opened the screen. "You need to rest, Isabella," Sarah murmured, her voice laced with exhaustion. "There is nothing we can do tonight. He locked us out." "He locked us out of the physical house, Mom," I replied, my fingers resting on the illuminated keyboard, but he left his digital front door wide open. My father was a ruthless tech investor, but he was not an actual engineer. He understood the financial mechanics of software startups, but he possessed a dangerously superficial grasp of network security. He hired expensive contractors to install a sprawling, complex smart home network at the Palo Alto estate. He centralized the security cameras, the automated locks, the climate control, and his personal home office servers onto a single integrated wireless grid for maximum convenience. Convenience is the mortal enemy of security. I spent years penetrating fortified corporate mainframes for global financial institutions, identifying microscopic vulnerabilities in highly advanced firewalls. Bypassing a residential smart home network managed by a lazy, affluent executive was not a challenge. It was target practice. I launched a specialized encrypted virtual private network masking my physical location. I pinged the external IP address of the Palo Alto estate, initiating a rapid sequence of digital handshakes. Richard had changed the user passwords, but he failed to update the underlying firmware of the primary router. I exploited a known vulnerability in the outdated software, bypassing the administrative firewall in less than 12 minutes. I was officially inside the network. The conflict rapidly mutated from a messy public confrontation into a high-stakes digital espionage operation. I possessed total unrestricted access to the digital nervous system of the man who stole my mother's vineyard. I bypassed the security camera feeds and the environmental controls, aiming my digital crosshairs directly at his private home office server. I initiated a secure file transfer protocol mirroring his personal hard drives directly onto my encrypted partition. I watched the progress bar inch forward, siphoning gigabytes of financial ledgers, email archives, and scanned legal documents out of his fortress and into my laptop. The download completed shortly after 2 a.m. Sarah had finally fallen into a restless, exhausted sleep on the motel bed. The only sound in the room was the quiet whir of my laptop cooling fan and the distant hum of highway traffic. I began parsing through the extracted data. I sorted the files by date, prioritizing the recent folders labeled under Vanessa's shell company. I found the forged deed transfers, the corrupt zoning applications, and the communication logs between Richard and the commercial developers. It was a treasure trove of fiduciary fraud. But as I dug deeper into an archived folder labeled Personal Documentation, I uncovered something that made my blood run entirely cold. I opened a high-resolution scanned PDF document, expecting another forged real estate contract. Instead, I found a certified California birth certificate. The document was dated 25 years ago. The mother was listed as a woman named Maria Santos, a former administrative assistant who worked at my father's first startup venture. I scanned down to the father's name, Richard Jones. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I clicked to the next file in the folder. It was a comprehensive medical dossier from a private genetics laboratory in San Francisco. The report detailed a highly confidential paternity DNA test conducted just 3 years ago. The results conclusively confirmed a 99.9% genetic match between Richard Jones and a young woman named Vanessa Santos. The breath caught in my throat. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow, shattering the foundational reality of my entire life. Vanessa was not a brilliant young protégé. She was not a clever business partner or a sharp new investment prospect. She was my half-sister. Richard engaged in a secret affair 25 years ago, fathering a child he kept hidden from our family for over 2 decades. He did not suddenly decide to steal my mother's generational vineyard to fund a random startup. He was executing a calculated long-term strategy to quietly transfer our wealth to his secret biological daughter. He was methodically replacing his legitimate family, dismantling our lives, to build an empire for the child he kept in the shadows. I stared at the glowing screen, the sterile data exposing the monstrous depth of his betrayal. He sat at my 30th birthday dinner, raised a glass to the product of his infidelity, and toasted her as the daughter who never disappointed him. He humiliated me in front of my mother, while secretly handing Vanessa the keys to our kingdom. I closed the document, the cold, sterile reality of the files burning into my memory. The war was no longer just about recovering a stolen piece of Sonoma real estate. My father was attempting to financially execute my mother to fund his hidden life. I possessed the digital evidence to destroy him, but leveraging that data in the daylight would require a level of ruthless precision I had never attempted before. The sun was going to rise in a few hours, and when it did, the battle for my mother's survival would officially begin. The harsh morning sunlight filtered through the thin floral curtains of the San Jose motel room, casting long, unforgiving shadows across the stained carpet. I sat at the small particle board desk, my laptop screen still displaying the glowing DNA results. I listened to the quiet, rhythmic breathing of my mother sleeping fitfully on the stiff mattress. 35 years of marriage, 35 years of hosting his corporate dinners, ironing his custom shirts, and standing silently in his shadow. All of it was built on a foundation of profound, calculated deceit. I made a fresh pot of terrible motel coffee, waiting for Sarah to wake up. When she finally stirred, sitting up and rubbing her tired eyes, I did not soften the blow with empty platitudes. In the realm of cybersecurity, when a system is compromised, you do not sugarcoat the breach. You deliver the raw data so the client can prepare an immediate defense. I turned the laptop screen toward her. I gently guided her through the scanned birth certificate and the private genetic dossier. I watched the realization wash over her face. The initial shock hit her like a physical strike, draining the color from her cheeks. The tears came quickly, but they did not last long. As the sterile clinical data stared back at her, the devastating grief began to morph into something else entirely. The passive, quiet woman who had accepted her husband's arrogant dismissals for decades vanished. The betrayal ignited a profound, mobilizing anger deep within her chest. "He is not just stealing my father's vineyard," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with a cold, newfound fury. "He is using my generational wealth to finance the child he hid from me for 25 years. He is executing a hostile family takeover, Mom," I replied, closing the laptop. "But we possess the data to stop him. We need to secure the physical assets immediately." I packed my equipment, leaving Sarah to process the raw emotional fallout of her shattered marriage. I drove my car to the primary financial institution located in the affluent heart of Silicon Valley. This specific bank managed the sprawling complex portfolio of my mother's inheritance, including the original deeds to the Sonoma property. I intended to present the forged transfer documents and the intercepted audio confession to trigger an immediate institutional freeze on the vineyard sale. The bank branch resembled an upscale tech campus featuring polished concrete floors, glass walls, and complimentary artisan espresso. I bypassed the tellers and demanded an emergency meeting with the senior branch manager, a man named Gregory Vance. Gregory was a fixture in the local venture capital scene. I recognized him instantly from the endless stream of holiday parties my parents hosted. He was a frequent guest in my father's private country club foursome. The sinking realization that the game was rigged hit me before I even sat down in his plush leather chair. I presented my evidence. I laid out the forged deed documents extracted from Richard's server. I explained the timeline of the secret daughter and the fraudulent transfer. Finally, I played the intercepted audio file from my phone, letting Richard's booming voice confess to the forgery right there in the glass-walled office. Gregory did not flinch. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, and offering a smile, dripping with pure, patronizing condescension. "Isabella, I have known your father for 2 decades," Gregory said, his tone oozing with paternalistic dismissal. He is a pillar of the Palo Alto business community. He discussed this vineyard restructuring with me over 18 holes just last week. He expressed deep concern for your mother's inability to manage the tax liabilities. He forged her signature. I countered, my voice rising in frustration. I just played you a recording of him admitting to the felony. The manager sighed, checking his expensive gold watch as if my presence was a terrible inconvenience. The state of California operates under strict two-party consent wiretapping laws, Isabella. It is highly illegal to record or intercept private communications without the explicit permission of all involved parties. That audio file is legally inadmissible in any court of law, and presenting it to a financial institution borders on corporate espionage. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his sleek glass desk. I cannot freeze a completed commercial transfer based on illegally obtained audio and the frantic complaints of a stressed daughter. Your father submitted the proper forms. Our legal department approved the maneuver. Perhaps you should focus on repairing your relationship with your family rather than playing amateur detective. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. He dismissed the felony fraud sitting on his desk because protecting his wealthy golfing buddy was far more important than protecting my mother's generational wealth. I gathered my useless paperwork and walked out of the pristine marble lobby. The sweltering California heat hit my face like a physical blow as I stepped back onto the blazing asphalt parking lot. I realized I was not just fighting my father. I was fighting an entrenched boys' club that actively protected its own. Richard had legally sanctioned his robbery, trapping me behind a wall of arrogant, wealthy men who wielded institutional power like a weapon. The illegally intercepted voicemail was an explosive piece of leverage in a restaurant, but it was functionally useless in a courtroom. I needed a deeper, undeniable paper trail to break their defensive line. I merged back onto the highway, navigating the heavy midday traffic, returning to the dingy San Jose motel. The stark contrast between the glittering bank lobby and the stained concrete walkways of the motel served as a brutal reminder of our current reality. I walked up to the second-floor outdoor corridor, approaching room 214. I stopped in my tracks. A thick, heavy manila envelope was taped securely to the center of our hotel room door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had utilized a burner corporate credit card to secure this room. I had masked my digital footprint. Richard should not have known our physical location. The envelope proved that his resources extended far beyond sloppy home networks. He possessed the capital to deploy private investigators who could track a license plate across the valley in a matter of hours. I ripped the tape off the door, tearing the envelope open. I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on premium watermarked paper. The first document was a formal eviction notice, officially barring Sarah from entering the Palo Alto estate, citing irreconcilable domestic hostility. The second document was an expedited petition for dissolution of marriage. Richard was filing for divorce, demanding an immediate severing of all marital ties. But the final document was the true lethal strike. It was a drafted settlement contract offering a predatory ultimatum. Richard demanded Sarah surrender her remaining 50% equity in his booming tech investment firm by this coming Friday. If she signed away her shares, he promised to provide a modest monthly alimony payment. If she refused, he vowed to drag the divorce through years of brutal litigation, utilizing his vast fortune to bury her in legal fees until she faced total, inescapable bankruptcy. I stood in the sweltering outdoor corridor, clutching the aggressive legal threats. Richard was executing a flawless corporate siege. He locked us out, froze the accounts, secured the vineyard, and deployed his lawyers to strip the final remaining assets from my mother. He wanted to leave her destitute, clearing the path to build his new empire with Vanessa. I pushed the motel door open, stepping inside to find Sarah staring blankly at the muted television. I held the devastating legal papers in my hand, preparing to deliver another crushing blow. The conflict had escalated from a digital espionage operation into a brutal race against the clock. If I did not find a way to break his legal stronghold by Friday, my mother would lose everything. And Richard, knowing I possessed the skills to hunt him, was about to launch a psychological counterattack designed to destroy the only weapon I had left: my career. I set the thick stack of predatory legal documents down on the small particle board desk of our motel room. The harsh reality of Richard's coordinated siege settled heavily over the cramped space. He possessed the capital, the legal firepower, and the institutional connections to systematically dismantle 35 years of marriage in a matter of days. I watched my mother curl inward, pulling her cardigan tight around her shoulders, staring at the floor with defeated, exhausted eyes. I needed to formulate a counteroffensive, but a sharp, jarring vibration from my phone shattered my concentration. The caller ID displayed the main switchboard number for my corporate headquarters. I worked as a senior analyst for a premier cybersecurity firm based in San Francisco, managing the digital infrastructure for some of the largest financial institutions on the West Coast. My job required maintaining a flawless, impeccable ethical record. A single blemish on my background check could result in the immediate revocation of my federal security clearance. I answered the call expecting a routine update from my department lead. Instead, the tense, clipped voice of the Human Resources Director greeted me. "Isabella, we need you to return to the corporate office immediately," the director stated, bypassing any polite preamble. "We received an anonymous tip this morning through our internal compliance portal. The whistleblower provided highly detailed allegations claiming you utilized proprietary company software to illegally penetrate a private residential server." A cold shock of pure adrenaline spiked through my nervous system. Richard realized I had breached his sloppy home network. He likely hired an expensive private security contractor to audit his systems after I played the intercepted voicemail at the restaurant. They traced my encrypted ping back to my corporate hardware. Instead of simply patching his firewall, he recognized an opportunity to eliminate the only person standing between him and my mother's entire fortune. The HR director continued, her voice carrying the heavy weight of impending termination. "The tip alleged you engaged in malicious corporate espionage fueled by a personal domestic dispute. They claimed you are exhibiting erratic hostile behavior and utilizing your federal clearance to terrorize your own family." I paced the short length of the motel room, gripping the phone tightly. "What kind of domestic dispute?" I asked, keeping my tone flat and analytical, masking the rising panic. "The caller alleged that your mother is suffering from severe early-onset dementia," the director revealed, lowering her voice slightly. "They claimed your father initiated a legal asset transfer to protect her estate and that you hacked his private servers in a jealous rage to steal the capital for yourself." "Isabella, these are catastrophic allegations. If you violated federal wiretapping statutes or abused your security clearance, we are legally obligated to suspend your employment and notify the authorities." The sheer audacity of the smear campaign took my breath away. Richard did not just launch a legal assault, he executed a flawless psychological strike. He weaponized his vast network of venture capitalists and tech executives, spreading a vicious narrative that painted me as a greedy, unhinged hacker, and my mother as a mentally incompetent victim. He relied on the fast-paced gossip mill of Silicon Valley to destroy my professional reputation before I could even present my evidence. In the insular world of corporate cybersecurity, reputation is the only currency that matters. My employers trusted me with the keys to their most sensitive digital kingdoms. If the administration believed these fabricated rumors, I would be instantly terminated. I would lose my salary, my health insurance, and the ability to fund any legal defense for my mother. Richard was attempting to sever my financial lifeline, ensuring we would both starve in this dingy roadside motel. "I will be at the office in 45 minutes, I told the HR director, maintaining a steady, uncompromising cadence. "Do not process any disciplinary paperwork until I present my logs." I ended the call and turned back to my laptop. The psychological warfare was suffocating. I felt the invisible walls of my father's influence closing in around me, isolating me from my peers and branding me a criminal. He thought he could manipulate the corporate compliance protocols to trigger an automatic dismissal. He assumed I would panic under the threat of losing my career. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the daughter he was fighting. I am a threat analyst. I do not panic when a system is breached. I isolate the vulnerability and deploy the countermeasure. I grabbed my silver work laptop, shoving it roughly into my leather messenger bag. I told Sarah to keep the motel door locked and to ignore any incoming phone calls. I ran down the outdoor concrete staircase, jumping into my car and merging aggressively onto the congested northbound lanes of the 101 freeway. The drive into the city was a blur of frantic tactical planning. Richard believed he held the high ground because he utilized an anonymous tip line. He thought hiding his identity would shield him from direct retaliation, while forcing my company to act purely on the severity of the allegations. But anonymous tips always leave a digital fingerprint, and I possessed the skills to follow that trace directly back to his doorstep. I arrived at my corporate headquarters, badging through the heavy glass security doors. The atmosphere in the lobby felt distinctly different. The security guards avoided eye contact, and my colleagues offered tight, nervous smiles as I walked past their cubicles. The toxic rumors had already permeated the office culture, branding me radioactive. I walked straight into the glass-walled conference room where the HR director and my senior department lead were waiting. They sat behind a long, polished table, their expressions grim and uncompromising. Isabella, my department lead, began resting his hands flat on the table. "We take these allegations incredibly seriously. Utilizing corporate hardware to execute a personal cyber attack violates every protocol in our handbook. We need you to surrender your work laptop immediately. We are initiating an emergency internal forensics audit. If we find unauthorized access logs to a private residential server, you will be terminated on the spot and escorted from the building." He held out his hand, expecting me to quietly surrender my device and accept my professional execution. I did not hand him the laptop. Instead, I unzipped my messenger bag, pulled the device out, and set it firmly on the table in front of me. I opened the screen and brought the machine out of sleep mode. "I am not handing over my hardware for a blind audit," I stated, looking directly into my director's eyes, "because I am going to show you exactly what I accessed, and I am going to prove that the anonymous tip you received was not a whistleblower complaint. It was a desperate, calculated attempt by a man trying to cover up a multi-million-dollar real estate fraud." I turned the screen toward them, ready to execute a defense that would turn my father's psychological warfare back against him. I was about to prove that my corporate access was not a weapon I abused. It was the exact shield that authorized my investigation. The HR director and my senior department lead stared at the glowing laptop screen, their initial hostility slowly fracturing into profound confusion. They expected to see unauthorized infiltration logs proving I breached a private residential network. They expected the digital equivalent of a broken window. Instead, I displayed a series of pristine authorized administrative dashboards. The anonymous tip claimed I illegally hacked a private home server. I began my voice steady, holding the absolute certainty of a professional operating within her legal bounds. That is a lie. I accessed a mobile device issued by a corporate entity. Specifically, I accessed the primary mobile network utilized by my father's investment firm. My department lead frowned, leaning closer to the screen. "You accessed his corporate mobile network, Isabella. Even if it is a company phone, you cannot arbitrarily intercept executive communications without authorization. That still violates our ethical protocols. I did not act without authorization," I countered, bringing up a digital contract filed within our own corporate system. 2 years ago, my father's firm contracted our agency to provide third-party security administration for their executive mobile devices. They experienced a severe phishing attack and hired us to implement automated threat detection protocols across all upper management hardware. I pointed to the digital signature on the bottom of the contract. "That is my father's signature authorizing our firm to monitor, intercept, and quarantine any anomalous data packets transmitted over his corporate network to prevent corporate espionage." I was assigned as the primary architect for that specific account. I possessed the highest level of administrative clearance to monitor that exact network. The HR director shifted uncomfortably in her chair, realizing the implications of my defense. 3 days ago, I continued opening the encrypted audio file. I flagged a suspicious data packet routed through a compromised cloud server connected to his device. I intercepted a voicemail left on that corporate phone. I operated entirely within the legal boundaries of my contracted administrative duties. No privacy laws were broken because the device itself belonged to a network I was legally cleared to monitor. I pressed play, allowing Richard's booming voice to fill the glass-walled conference room. My bosses listened to my father arrogantly confessing to forging my mother's signature and executing a fraudulent real estate transfer. The sterile corporate environment provided a stark contrast to the emotional weight of the audio recording. When the voicemail concluded, the silence in the room was heavy and absolute. The narrative of the erratic, jealous daughter hacking a private home server evaporated entirely. The truth replaced it, revealing a calculated, ruthless executive utilizing his corporate hardware to execute severe domestic fraud. My department lead sat back in his chair, letting out a long, weary sigh. He rubbed his temples, processing the sheer scale of the deception my father attempted. He filed the anonymous tip himself. The lead deduced his tone dripping with newly formed disgust. He knew you possessed the skills to monitor his network. He tried to weaponize our compliance protocols to silence you and strip you of your resources before you could expose his real estate theft. It was a preemptive strike, I confirmed, closing the audio file. He assumed I would panic and resign to avoid a federal audit. He underestimated my adherence to procedure. The HR director closed her disciplinary folder, sliding it back across the polished table. "Isabella, your employment status is secure," she stated, her voice losing its previous corporate chill, replaced by quiet professional solidarity. "Your access logs are clean. You operated within the scope of your administrative clearance. We will close the internal investigation immediately." My department lead nodded in agreement. "We do not tolerate external executives attempting to manipulate our staff for personal vendettas." He added, a sharp edge of protective anger surfacing. "If you require flexible hours or access to our advanced forensic software to handle this personal matter, you have our full unofficial support. Do what you need to do to protect your mother." I thanked them, leaving the conference room with my career and my security clearance firmly intact. The psychological warfare Richard deployed had failed spectacularly. He attempted to sever my financial lifeline, but only succeeded in securing my employer's loyalty. With my professional foundation secured, I pivoted my focus, transitioning from defensive survival back to aggressive offensive tactics. I returned to my desk, plugging my laptop into the high-speed corporate network. Richard had bragged on the voicemail that the Sonoma Vineyard was legally sheltered under a shell company controlled by Vanessa. If I wanted to stop the final transfer, I needed to dismantle that specific corporate entity. I initiated a deep dive, utilizing advanced forensic routing software to peel back the layers of Vanessa's holding company. The initial surface data appeared legitimate, listing a standard domestic LLC registered in Delaware. But as I probed deeper, penetrating the secondary routing nodes, I discovered the domestic registry was merely a hollow facade. The LLC was inextricably linked to a web of complex offshore accounts. And those accounts were not just holding the deed to my mother's vineyard. They were acting as a massive digital funnel. I watched the data flow across my monitor, a cold, chilling realization settling in my chest. The shell company was receiving staggering sequential deposits in untraceable cryptocurrency. We were not talking about small personal investments. We were talking about millions of dollars quietly moving through the blockchain, bypassing traditional banking oversight entirely. I traced the origin point of the massive crypto deposits executing a complex decryption protocol. The digital breadcrumbs led directly back to a highly controversial commercial development firm based in Los Angeles. The firm was notorious across the state for utilizing aggressive, shady tactics to acquire prime California real estate, bulldozing historic properties to construct sprawling, soulless tech campuses. The conflict escalated instantly, shattering the boundaries of a bitter family dispute. This was no longer just a story about an unfaithful husband trying to fund his secret daughter. Richard and Vanessa were engaged in massive corporate corruption. They forged the deed to the Sonoma Vineyard to secure the land below market value. They were accepting massive under-the-table crypto bribes from the commercial developer to expedite the sale, ensuring the historic vineyard would be razed to the ground to build a massive commercial tech hub. They were selling my mother's generational legacy to corporate predators for digital kickbacks. My phone buzzed on my desk, vibrating against the polished wood. I glanced at the screen. It was an incoming encrypted message from a private investigator I had retained, utilizing a portion of my emergency corporate funds. I opened the message. The investigator had attached a high-resolution photograph taken just 20 minutes ago in the financial district of San Francisco. The image displayed Vanessa sitting at an upscale outdoor cafe. She looked remarkably relaxed, wearing designer sunglasses and sipping an artisan coffee. Sitting directly across from her, leaning over a stack of blueprints and sipping an espresso, was the chief executive officer of the corrupt commercial development firm. The text accompanying the photograph delivered a lethal ticking clock. Target is finalizing the zoning permits the investigator wrote. They are accelerating the transaction. The final sale of the vineyard closes tomorrow at noon. I stared at the photograph, my blood running entirely cold. The quiet, strategic maneuvering was over. Richard and Vanessa were moving to finalize the destruction of my mother's legacy in less than 24 hours. If that sale executed and the bulldozers arrived, the vineyard would be lost forever. The war was officially transitioning from the digital realm into the physical world, and I was rapidly running out of time to stop the machines. The photograph glowing on my smartphone screen confirmed the terrifying reality of their accelerated timeline. I needed to move fast to secure an emergency injunction before the commercial developers officially acquired the deed. I packed my laptop and left the corporate headquarters, stepping out into the bustling, energetic streets of downtown San Francisco. The midday fog had burned off, leaving a crisp, bright California afternoon. I navigated the steep, crowded sidewalks, heading toward a prominent legal firm where my mother had retained a seasoned property attorney. I paused at a bustling corner cafe to grab a quick coffee, bracing myself for the grueling legal drafting process ahead. The line moved slowly, filled with tech workers and tourists. I ordered my drink and stepped aside, waiting near the pickup counter. Isabella. The voice was smooth, practiced, and entirely unexpected. I turned around. Vanessa stood just a few feet away, holding a steaming latte. She looked immaculate, wearing a tailored silk blouse and an expression of profound manufactured vulnerability. She did not look like the smug, victorious woman who toasted my father at the Napa Valley restaurant. She looked like a desperate victim caught in a tragic misunderstanding. She had intercepted me. My private investigator was tracking her movements, but she was clearly monitoring my physical proximity, recognizing my routine path through the financial district. "Can we please talk?" Vanessa asked, her voice dropping into a soft, pleading register. "Just for a few minutes. I know you hate me. I know you think I orchestrated this entire nightmare, but you do not know the whole story." I stared at her, gripping my cardboard coffee cup tightly. Every instinct warned me to walk away, to refuse engagement with the woman executing a hostile takeover of my family. But the cybersecurity analyst in me recognized an opportunity. When hostile actors attempt a social engineering maneuver, they often inadvertently reveal their vulnerabilities. I needed to see what she was offering. I motioned toward an empty, small, circular table near the busy street window. We sat down facing each other across the narrow space. The ambient noise of the coffee shop espresso machines grinding and patrons chatting provided a chaotic backdrop to the quiet, tense standoff. "I did not know about the forged deed," Isabella. Vanessa began, leaning forward, projecting an aura of sincere, sisterly despair. "Richard told me the vineyard was hopelessly encumbered by tax debt. He told me he was transferring the property to my holding company to protect Sarah from bankruptcy. He manipulated me." She paused, letting out a shaky breath, perfectly timing her emotional delivery. "You grew up with him," Vanessa continued, her eyes welling with forced tears. "You had the wealth, the security, the two-parent household. I grew up in the shadows. I was the hidden, secret, fatherless child. When he finally brought me into his world, I wanted to believe he was a good man. I trusted him blindly. He used my company to execute his fraud." I listened to her sob story, maintaining a cold, analytical silence. Her performance was flawless. She wove a narrative of a marginalized daughter desperate for paternal approval, falling victim to a ruthless patriarch. She wanted me to view her as collateral damage rather than a willing co-conspirator. Vanessa reached into her designer handbag and produced a crisp, folded legal document, sliding it smoothly across the small table. "I want to make this right," Vanessa whispered, tapping the contract. "This is a binding settlement agreement. I am authorizing the release of 50% of the vineyard sale profits directly back into Sarah's personal accounts. It is enough capital to ensure she lives comfortably for the rest of her life. In exchange, you simply drop the cyber investigation. You stop hunting the offshore crypto accounts, and we walk away without destroying the entire family in federal court." I looked down at the settlement contract. She was attempting a classic manipulative counterplay. She recognized my digital pursuit of the crypto bribes terrified the commercial developers. She offered a massive financial concession to buy my silence, framing it as an act of sisterly solidarity. I raised my eyes from the document, intending to dissect her fraudulent narrative, but my gaze caught the distinct gleam of metal catching the sunlight streaming through the cafe window. Resting against the collar of her expensive silk blouse was a delicate, intricate vintage diamond necklace. It featured a unique emerald-cut center stone surrounded by a delicate platinum filigree setting. The breath caught in my throat. It was not a generic piece of luxury jewelry. It was the heirloom necklace my grandfather purchased for my mother on their 20th wedding anniversary. It was a priceless one, of a kind piece that Sarah cherished, keeping it locked securely in her mahogany jewelry box at the Palo Alto estate. The faux sympathy shattered instantly. The narrative of the manipulated innocent daughter evaporated, leaving only the cold, calculated reality of a ruthless thief. Richard did not just lock us out of the estate and drain the bank accounts. He actively looted my mother's personal sanctuary, handing her most treasured generational heirlooms to his secret daughter. And Vanessa possessed the sheer stunning audacity to wear that stolen necklace while attempting to negotiate a fraudulent settlement. I reached across the table, sliding the settlement contract back toward her. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, lethal precision that cut through the ambient noise of the coffee shop. "You did not grow up in the shadows, Vanessa," I stated, locking my eyes onto the stolen diamonds resting on her chest. "You grew up watching our lives, waiting for the moment you could steal them. You knew exactly what Richard was doing when he forged that deed, and you knew exactly who owned that necklace before you clasped it around your neck this morning." Vanessa's tearful expression vanished, the polite, sisterly mask slipping away entirely. Her features hardened, settling into a sneering, arrogant glare. The victim routine was over. "I will not negotiate with thieves," I continued, my voice unwavering, "and I will not accept 50% of a vineyard my mother owns entirely. Keep your settlement. I am going to expose the offshore accounts, and I am going to watch the federal authorities dismantle your shell company." Vanessa leaned in close, her posture shifting from defensive to aggressively triumphant. She no longer bothered to hide her true nature. "You are too late," Isabella Vanessa whispered, a cruel, mocking smile spreading across her face. "The developers already wired the final tranche of capital. The title transfer is queued in the county registry. The expedited sale of the Sonoma property closes tomorrow at exactly noon." She stood up, grabbing her designer handbag and looking down at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Once that clock strikes 12, the developers take possession," Vanessa concluded, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "The demolition crews are already staged near the property line. They are going to bulldoze your precious generational vines to build a parking structure for a tech campus. And there is nothing you or your little cyber investigation can do to stop the machines." She turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the stolen diamonds glittering under the bright San Francisco sun. She left me sitting at the small table, staring at my cooling coffee. The clock was officially ticking. I had less than 24 hours to secure an emergency federal injunction and physically halt a multi-million-dollar real estate transaction before my mother's legacy was irreversibly turned to dust. I left the coffee shop moving with a frantic, urgent energy that mirrored the ticking clock in my head. I walked briskly down the steep San Francisco streets, pulling my phone from my pocket and dialing Sarah. I instructed her to meet me at the private airstrip near San Jose. We did not have time to navigate the congested gridlock of the coastal highways. I utilized my emergency corporate expense account to charter a small hopper flight, ensuring we arrived in Los Angeles before the end of the business day. We needed the expertise of Marcus, a seasoned property attorney who possessed a reputation for executing ruthless 11th-hour legal injunctions. The flight south was silent and tense. Sarah sat near the small, oval window, watching the expansive California coastline blur past her eyes, red and puffy from exhaustion. The sheer scale of Richard's betrayal was crushing her, but the revelation of the stolen diamond necklace seemed to sever the final lingering thread of her marital loyalty. The quiet, passive woman was gone, replaced by a mother fiercely determined to protect her ancestral legacy. We landed at a small municipal airport in Los Angeles County and took a private car directly to Marcus and his sleek, high-rise office overlooking the sprawling downtown grid. Marcus was a man built of sharp angles and relentless pragmatism. He wore a simple tailored suit without a tie, radiating the focused energy of a litigator who viewed every case as a complex tactical puzzle. He ushered us into a large glass-walled conference room, skipping any polite introductions. We have less than 18 hours before the county registry finalizes the title transfer, Marcus stated flatly, dropping a thick stack of printed property records onto the long mahogany table. If that developer assumes legal possession tomorrow at noon, they will bulldoze the vines immediately. They know a demolished property cannot be easily recovered in a civil dispute. We need a bulletproof reason to convince a federal judge to issue an emergency halt. Marcus slid a copy of the forged deed transfer across the table. "This is our primary obstacle," he explained, pointing to the final signature page. "Richard did not march your mother into a bank to sign this deed in front of a physical notary public. He utilized a verified commercial digital signature platform. The system generates a secure encrypted envelope, authenticating the document electronically. Judges treat these digital signatures as ironclad binding agreements. Overturning it typically requires months of handwriting analysis and prolonged litigation. We do not have months." I picked up the printed copy of the forged deed, staring at the stark black ink, rendering my mother's name. The physical signature was flawless, a perfect mimicking of her flowing cursive script. But Marcus was correct. The legal system viewed the digital authentication platform as the ultimate validator. However, my professional expertise did not reside in interpreting legal statutes. I lived in the architecture of the data itself. A digital signature is not magic. I said, my voice steady, carrying the calm authority of a senior analyst. It is a data packet. When an individual executes a document through one of these verified platforms, the system captures a massive amount of hidden metadata. It records the exact time of execution, the browser type, the operating system, and most importantly, the precise network location. I pulled my silver work laptop from my messenger bag, opening the screen and powering up the device. If Richard forged this document from his home office in Palo Alto, the metadata will trace back to his residential internet service provider. I continued, my fingers flying rapidly across the keyboard. But if he was sloppy, if he executed this forgery while traveling or utilizing an unsecured network, we might find a geographical inconsistency that proves Sarah could not possibly have signed the document. Marcus leaned forward, his sharp eyes narrowing with sudden, intense interest. "Can you access the metadata of that specific digital envelope?" "I am a cybersecurity analyst, Marcus," I replied, launching a specialized decryption program. I routinely dismantle enterprise-level security architectures. Extracting the routing data from a commercial digital signature platform is a trivial exercise. I needed the unique tracking number printed at the bottom of the deed. I typed the long string of alphanumeric characters into my terminal, bypassing the standard user interface of the signature platform and querying the underlying application programming interface directly. The system buffered for a few agonizing seconds, the loading icon spinning against the dark screen. The data parsed, compiling a comprehensive digital footprint of the exact moment the forged deed was executed. I isolated the originating Internet Protocol address and the unique media access control address of the hardware device utilized to finalize the document. I ran the IP address through a global registry database, tracing the digital signal back to its physical origin point. The results populated on my monitor, and the breath caught in my throat. The conflict instantly transformed from a desperate defensive scramble into a brilliant, lethal technological trap. I turned the laptop screen toward Marcus and Sarah. Richard did not forge this document at the Palo Alto estate, I announced, pointing to the geographical trace glowing on the screen. He did not execute the signature from his investment firm or a local coffee shop. I pulled up the corporate registration data linked to the static IP address. The digital signature confirming the transfer of the Sonoma Vineyard was executed on a secure private network registered exclusively to the corporate headquarters of the commercial development firm purchasing the land. The heavy silence in the conference room was absolute. Sarah covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Marcus stared at the screen, his mind rapidly calculating the devastating legal implications of the data. Richard did not act alone. I concluded the explosive realizations settling over us. He did not simply forge a document and present it to an unsuspecting buyer. He walked directly into the developer's corporate headquarters and executed the forgery using their internal network. The implications were catastrophic for the buyers. The commercial developers were not innocent third parties purchasing a disputed piece of real estate. They actively provided the secure network infrastructure to facilitate the forgery. They knowingly participated in the fabrication of the deed, ensuring they acquired the prime Sonoma real estate significantly below market value. "They are accomplices," Marcus whispered, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "This is not just a civil family dispute over a stolen vineyard. This is a multi-million-dollar coordinated federal fraud conspiracy." Marcus stood up, grabbing a fresh legal pad and a pen, his energy completely revitalized. The digital signature platform thought it was authenticating a legitimate contract. Marcus explained, pacing the length of the conference room. "But you just proved the developers left their digital fingerprints all over the crime scene. A federal judge will not just halt the sale. They will freeze the developer's entire operational portfolio pending a severe criminal investigation." He stopped pacing, looking directly at me. "We have the bulletproof evidence we need. I am drafting the emergency federal injunction right now." Marcus began writing furiously, outlining the aggressive legal maneuver. "We possess the weapon to stop the bulldozers and secure my mother's legacy. But identifying the fraud was only half the battle. To execute the injunction and halt the transfer before the noon deadline, we needed to physically serve the legal documents to the executives of the commercial development firm. And as Marcus quickly discovered, those executives were not sitting in a standard office building waiting for a process server. They were hiding behind a massive fortress of elite corporate security, preparing to celebrate their fraudulent acquisition at an exclusive high society event. Delivering the injunction would require me to bypass armed guards and infiltrate a world where I absolutely did not belong. The glow of my laptop screen illuminated the dark conference room as Marcus finalized the emergency federal injunction. The document was a masterpiece of aggressive litigation, detailing the forged metadata, the specific IP address, overlaps, and the undeniable corporate collusion. It demanded the immediate cessation of the Sonoma Vineyard transfer, pending a comprehensive federal fraud investigation. A federal judge reviewing the irrefutable digital evidence signed the order electronically shortly after midnight. We possessed the judicial weapon required to stop the bulldozers. However, securing the injunction was merely the administrative hurdle. The true logistical nightmare involved physically serving the legal documents to the chief executive officer of the commercial development firm before the county registry finalized the deed transfer at noon the following day. Marcus spent an hour aggressively calling his network of process servers, attempting to locate the elusive CEO. The feedback was grim. The developer was not resting at his private residence or working late at his corporate headquarters. He was attending a lavish, highly exclusive private charity gala hosted at a sprawling estate deep within the Hollywood Hills. "These events operate like independent sovereign nations," Marcus explained, dragging a hand down his tired face. "The estate is surrounded by private armed security contractors. They utilize encrypted digital guest lists and strictly enforce a no-entry policy for uninvited personnel. A standard process server will never breach the perimeter. They will be turned away at the front gate, and the CEO will simply hide inside the fortress until the noon deadline passes. I looked at the printed injunction resting on the mahogany table. Standard legal channels were destined to fail. If we relied on a polite knock at the front gate, my mother would lose her generational legacy. We needed to bypass the physical security, utilizing the exact same digital infiltration tactics I employed to secure the metadata. I need the name of the ticketing platform managing the gala guest list, I told Marcus, pulling my laptop back toward me. Marcus frowned, checking a forwarded email from his investigator. It is an elite concierge service. They utilize dynamic QR codes issued directly to the attendees' mobile devices. Dynamic QR codes are designed to prevent screenshot sharing by constantly refreshing the digital signature. But like all security protocols, they possess vulnerabilities. I accessed the concierge service platform, deploying a specialized packet sniffer to intercept the unencrypted data flowing between the server and the mobile applications. I identified a valid attendee profile belonging to a prominent local socialite who had recently canceled her RSVP online. I isolated the unique cryptographic seed assigned to her profile and generated a cloned active QR code on my own smartphone. I possess a valid digital invitation, I announced, standing up and packing my equipment. But I cannot walk into a Hollywood Hills gala wearing a wrinkled business suit. Sarah, who had been sitting quietly processing the frantic momentum of the evening, finally spoke. She reached into her leather travel bag and pulled out a sleek garment bag she packed during our hasty departure from the motel. I brought the emerald evening gown I wore to the winter charity ball last year, Sarah said, her voice steady and resolute. We are roughly the same size, Isabella. You will blend in perfectly. The transformation took less than 30 minutes. I traded my sensible work clothes for a stunning floor-length emerald gown, securing my hair in a sleek, practical style. I hired a private car service, instructing the driver to navigate the winding, steep roads of the Hollywood Hills. Marcus retained a highly specialized discrete process server named David, who agreed to ride alongside me, posing as my formal escort for the evening. We arrived at the sprawling estate shortly after 10 o'clock. The property was a modern architectural marvel of glass and steel, perched precariously on the edge of a steep canyon overlooking the glittering expanse of the Los Angeles basin. A line of luxury vehicles waited patiently at the imposing front gates, while burly security guards meticulously scanned mobile devices. My heart hammered against my ribs as our car pulled up to the checkpoint. The security guard, a large man wearing a tactical earpiece, leaned down, checking our faces against his digital tablet. I held out my smartphone, displaying the clone dynamic QR code. He scanned the screen with a handheld device. The system emitted a sharp, confirming beep. The guard nodded respectfully, stepping back and waving our vehicle through the heavy iron gates. The infiltration was successful. We stepped out of the car and merged seamlessly into the sea of affluent guests. The gala was a staggering display of wealth, featuring champagne towers, elaborate floral arrangements, and a live string quartet playing near an infinity pool. Movie producers, tech billionaires, and prominent politicians mingled freely, projecting an aura of untouchable superiority. I ignored the opulence scanning the crowded patios and dimly lit lounges for the faces I recognized. I moved through the event with deliberate purpose, scanning the VIP sections cordoned off by velvet ropes. Finally, I spotted them. Tucked away in a private, luxurious cabana overlooking the glowing city skyline sat the architects of my mother's destruction. Richard wore a pristine, tailored tuxedo, projecting the arrogant confidence of a man who believed he had executed a flawless heist. Vanessa sat beside him, draped in designer silk, wearing the stolen vintage diamond necklace that originally belonged to my grandmother. Sitting across from them, laughing loudly, holding a crystal champagne flute, was the corrupt CEO of the commercial development firm. They were toasting their impending success, celebrating the imminent destruction of the Sonoma Vineyard and the massive financial windfall they secured through federal fraud. I did not hesitate. I signaled David the process server, indicating our target. We bypassed the velvet rope, walking directly into the private cabana. The laughter died instantly as Richard registered my presence. His arrogant smile evaporated, replaced by a look of profound, shocked disbelief. He could not comprehend how the invisible cybersecurity analyst had breached his impenetrable fortress. Vanessa gasped, her hand flying up to touch the stolen diamonds resting against her collarbone. The commercial developer frowned, lowering his champagne glass, annoyed by the sudden intrusion. "Who let you into this section?" he demanded, his tone thick with entitled irritation. David stepped forward, bypassing any polite introductions. He pulled the thick, folded federal injunction from his interior jacket pocket and dropped it directly into the developer's crystal champagne glass. The heavy paper splashed into the expensive liquid, soaking instantly. "You have been served," David announced, his voice carrying clear and steady over the ambient music. The developer stared at the ruined document floating in his drink, the reality of the legal ambush settling over him. He pulled the soaked paper from the glass, unfolding it with trembling fingers. He read the bold header detailing the federal injunction, the forged IP addresses, and the pending criminal fraud investigation. The blood drained completely from his face. He looked at Richard, his eyes wide with sheer panicked fury, realizing his corporate empire was about to be dismantled by federal prosecutors. The public disruption shattered their arrogant celebration. We had delivered the fatal blow, securing the vineyard and exposing the criminal conspiracy. I looked at Richard, expecting to see the same terrified despair that consumed the developer. Instead, Richard let out a dark, low, arrogant laugh. He did not look panicked. He did not look defeated. He reached into his tuxedo breast pocket, his expression twisting into a chilling, victorious sneer. "You are incredibly persistent, Isabella." Richard stated, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "You orchestrated a brilliant little digital trap, but you fundamentally misunderstood the rules of the game we are playing." He pulled a crisp, folded document from his pocket and held it out toward me. "A federal injunction is a powerful tool." Richard continued, tapping the paper against his palm. "But it requires the legal authorization of the property owner to remain valid. It requires Sarah to possess the legal capacity to contest the sale." I frowned, staring at the document. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my pulse accelerating as a cold sense of dread washed over me. Richard unfolded the paper, revealing a formal medical order bearing the official seal of the state of California. "I am talking about a newly executed emergency medical conservatorship," Richard revealed, his voice echoing with lethal finality. "A certified psychiatric evaluation declaring your mother completely legally incompetent due to severe early-onset dementia." He smiled, a cruel, predatory expression that chilled me to the bone. As her newly appointed legal conservator, I possess total unilateral control over all her financial and legal decisions, Richard concluded. "Which means I am officially withdrawing the federal injunction you just served. The sale of the vineyard closes at noon, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it." The booming bass of the gala music seemed to fade into a dull, distant throb as I stared at the medical document resting in Richard's hands. The paper bore an official state seal, rendering it a devastating legal weapon. A conservatorship designed to protect vulnerable individuals had been weaponized into a financial execution. By securing that specific medical order, Richard effectively stripped my mother of her personhood. She could no longer sign contracts, hire attorneys, or contest the sale of her own ancestral property. He silenced her legally, ensuring the federal injunction we fought so hard to serve was instantaneously voided. The commercial developer recovered his composure, recognizing the sudden shift in leverage. He smoothed the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, wiping the spilled champagne off the soaked injunction. "It appears this document is no longer valid," the developer stated, addressing the process server with a dismissive, arrogant wave. "You can take your paperwork and leave my private event before I have you arrested for trespassing." Two massive private security contractors suddenly flanked the entrance to the VIP cabana, summoned by the quiet gesture of the developer. They did not wait for a polite exit. They placed their heavy hands on my shoulders and the process server's back, physically guiding us away from the plush seating area. I did not struggle against the guards. I locked eyes with Richard one final time, absorbing the smug, victorious sneer etched across his face as he turned back to clink his glass with Vanessa. The security team escorted us through the sprawling estate, marching us past the oblivious affluent guests and depositing us firmly outside the heavy wrought iron gates. The cool night air of the Hollywood Hills offered a sharp contrast to the suffocating tension inside the party. I climbed into the back of our waiting car, my mind racing through the catastrophic legal roadblock. Overturning a medical conservatorship through standard legal channels is a notoriously agonizing process. It requires filing formal petitions in a backlogged probate court, scheduling independent medical evaluations, and enduring months of grinding litigation. Richard knew the system was sluggish. He counted on the bureaucratic delay to provide the narrow 24-hour window he needed to finalize the vineyard sale and bulldoze the vines. But Richard fundamentally misunderstood the arena where I waged my wars. He relied on paper and bribed physicians. I relied on data, and data never lies. I pulled my laptop from my messenger bag the moment the car merged onto the highway, heading back toward the Los Angeles office where Marcus and Sarah were waiting. I did not need a probate judge to evaluate my mother's mental health. I needed to evaluate the doctor who signed the fraudulent order. I recalled the name printed boldly at the top of the medical evaluation: Dr. Lawrence Sterling. A quick search revealed he operated an exclusive concierge medical practice servicing the ultra-wealthy elite of Beverly Hills and Silicon Valley. He catered to executives who demanded ultimate discretion and possessed the capital to pay for boutique personalized care. He was exactly the kind of physician who would accept a massive cash bribe to falsify a psychiatric evaluation for a prominent tech investor. I arrived at Marcus and his high-rise office shortly after midnight. Sarah was asleep on the leather sofa in the waiting area, exhausted by the relentless emotional whiplash of the day. Marcus was pacing the conference room, poring over legal precedents, trying to find a loophole in the conservatorship statutes. "Stop looking for a legal loophole," I told Marcus, setting my laptop firmly on the mahogany table. "We are not going to fight the medical diagnosis. We are going to destroy the doctor who wrote it." I launched my encrypted virtual private network masking my digital footprint as I initiated a targeted cyber reconnaissance protocol. Dr. Sterling catered to a high-net-worth clientele, meaning his practice required a secure, robust digital health portal to manage confidential patient record scheduling and remote consultations. But concierge doctors often prioritize seamless user experience over rigorous back-end security, relying on commercial software templates that harbor known vulnerabilities. I bypassed the primary patient login portal, executing an aggressive penetration test against the underlying scheduling application programming interface. The system resisted briefly before yielding to the brute force attack, granting me administrative access to the doctor's private calendar and patient logs. I cross-referenced the date and time listed on the fraudulent psychological evaluation Richard presented at the gala. The document claimed Dr. Sterling conducted a comprehensive 2-hour in-person psychiatric assessment of Sarah at the Palo Alto estate last Thursday afternoon. I pulled up the doctor's master scheduling log for that specific Thursday. The schedule did not list a home visit to Palo Alto. The entire week was blocked out, marked with a single repeating entry labeled "Personal Time Away." A scheduling discrepancy is suspicious, but it is not undeniable proof of perjury. A clever defense attorney could argue the doctor simply failed to log the appointment correctly. I needed ironclad, irrefutable evidence proving his physical location on that specific day. I pivoted my focus from his secure medical portal to the most notoriously insecure database on the internet: social media. Dr. Sterling maintained a polished professional public profile, but individuals accustomed to luxury rarely resist the urge to document their lavish lifestyles. I utilized an advanced open-source intelligence tool to scrape the hidden metadata from his recent digital footprint. I searched for secondary accounts, burner profiles, or tagged images associated with his close social circle. I discovered a private restricted photo-sharing account registered to his much younger fiancée. I bypassed the privacy settings, extracting the raw image files uploaded during the specific Thursday in question. The fiancé had posted a series of high-resolution photographs documenting their romantic getaway. I isolated a particularly clear image showing Dr. Sterling smiling broadly, holding a tropical cocktail while lounging poolside under a vibrant cabana. I ran the image through an extraction program, isolating the exchangeable image file format data embedded deep within the digital code. The metadata revealed the exact make and model of the smartphone used to capture the image, the precise timestamp of the photograph, and the specific global positioning coordinates where the picture was taken. I mapped the coordinates onto a digital globe, projecting the results onto the large monitor in the conference room. The conflict officially shifted from a slow probate battle into a lethal targeted strike against a corrupt medical license. Marcus stopped pacing, staring at the glowing red pin dropped onto the digital map. Dr. Sterling did not evaluate my mother in Palo Alto last Thursday afternoon. I announced, a cold, triumphant smile spreading across my face. He was not even in the state of California. I pointed to the coordinates resting on the map. According to the embedded geographical metadata, Dr. Sterling was actively vacationing at a 5-star luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, at the exact minute he supposedly diagnosed my mother with severe dementia. We possessed the undeniable proof. The medical conservatorship was not just a misdiagnosis, it was a brazen, fabricated lie. Richard paid a concierge doctor to commit federal perjury and medical fraud. We had the ammunition to shatter the conservatorship and restore my mother's legal rights. But we only had a few short hours until dawn to force the corrupt physician to confess his crimes to the court. The digital map displaying the Cabo San Lucas resort glowing on the conference room monitor felt like a ticking bomb waiting to be detonated. Marcus stared at the geographical data, a sharp predator's smile forming on his face. We did not need to schedule a lengthy probate hearing or hire expensive medical experts to debate the nuances of dementia. We simply needed to hand the forged evidence directly to the authorities who possessed the power to destroy Dr. Sterling's lucrative career. It was 3 a.m. The sprawling city of Los Angeles was quiet below the high-rise office, but the digital world never sleeps. I compiled the extracted scheduling logs, the geotagged photographs, and the raw metadata into a heavily encrypted comprehensive dossier. "We are not going to wait for regular business hours," Marcus instructed, leaning over the mahogany table and typing rapidly on his own laptop. "I have the direct email contact for the presiding probate judge who issued the emergency conservatorship order. I am drafting an urgent motion to vacate the order based on severe medical fraud and perjury." While Marcus handled the judicial submission, I focused my crosshairs on the vulnerability that would truly terrify a Beverly Hills concierge doctor: his medical license. I drafted a formal whistleblower complaint to the California Medical Board attaching the pristine, unassailable digital evidence. I detailed the exact nature of the fabricated psychiatric evaluation, emphasizing that Dr. Sterling utilized his state medical credentials to execute a malicious financial takeover on behalf of a wealthy client. I hit send, launching the catastrophic complaint into the official regulatory queue. But I knew waiting for bureaucratic agencies to process emails could take days. I needed Dr. Sterling to feel the heat immediately. I needed him to panic and break before the sun came up, ensuring the conservatorship was dead before the commercial developers could finalize the vineyard sale at noon. I bypassed the traditional channels and sent the encrypted dossier directly to Dr. Sterling's personal mobile device, appending a brief, chilling message. "The California Medical Board and the presiding probate judge are currently reviewing your vacation photographs." I typed, my fingers striking the keys with lethal precision. "You have 2 choices, doctor. You can contact the court immediately, retract your fraudulent evaluation, and confess to the bribe. Or you can face federal perjury charges, the revocation of your medical license, and inevitable prison time for participating in a multi-million-dollar real estate conspiracy. The choice is yours. You have exactly 1 hour." I hit send. The digital trap was officially armed. We sat in the quiet conference room, watching the digital clock on my monitor tick away the agonizing minutes. Sarah remained asleep on the leather sofa, blissfully unaware of the high-stakes extortion play occurring just a few feet away. Marcus paced the room, his energy tightly coiled, checking his phone incessantly for a response from the probate court. 42 minutes later, my laptop pinged with an incoming email notification. It was a carbon copy of a formal communication dispatched directly from Dr. Sterling's legal counsel to the presiding probate judge. The corrupt concierge doctor had completely shattered under the threat of federal prosecution and the loss of his elite lifestyle. The email contained a desperate, scrambling retraction. Dr. Sterling officially withdrew the psychiatric evaluation, citing a catastrophic administrative error regarding the patient assessment, but a simple retraction was not enough to save him from the perjury evidence we possessed. The email continued detailing a frantic plea deal attempt. The doctor explicitly confessed that he did not conduct an in-person evaluation. He admitted that Richard Jones wired a $50,000 untraceable consultation fee to his offshore account in exchange for generating the emergency conservatorship documents while the doctor was vacationing in Mexico. "We broke him," Marcus whispered, reading the confession over my shoulder. "He threw your father under the bus to save his license." 10 minutes later, Marcus received a direct response from the furious probate judge. The magistrate recognized the severe manipulation of his courtroom. The email contained a digitally signed emergency order instantly nullifying the medical conservatorship. The fraudulent order was officially dead. Sarah's full legal rights were instantaneously restored. This meant the federal injunction halting the sale of the Sonoma vineyard, originally filed on Sarah's behalf, was fully validated and active. The corrupt commercial developers were legally paralyzed. The bulldozers were stopped. My mother's generational legacy was officially secure from the wrecking ball. I let out a long, shaky breath, resting my head in my hands. The exhausting, relentless marathon of the past 72 hours finally caught up with me. We had systematically dismantled every single trap my father set. We beat his forged deeds, his smear campaigns, and his corrupt medical bribes. But Richard was a cornered predator. The walls were rapidly closing in on him. His medical fraud was exposed, his real estate forgery was frozen, and his pristine Silicon Valley reputation was about to crumble under the weight of the impending federal investigations. He realized the legal system he tried to weaponize was turning its massive jaws toward him. Arrogant men do not accept defeat gracefully. When they realize the battle is lost, they attempt to salvage their wealth and run. I had maintained a persistent background trace on Richard's primary financial dashboards since our initial motel room infiltration. I wanted an early warning system in case he attempted any further manipulation of the joint assets. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale golden light over the Los Angeles skyline, a jarring red alert flashed across my tracking monitor. I sat bolt upright, my exhaustion vanishing, instantly replaced by a surge of pure adrenaline. "Marcus, look at this," I urged, pointing to the rapid sequence of transactions populating the screen. Richard was executing a desperate, cowardly pivot. Recognizing that the vineyard scheme had collapsed and the authorities were closing in, he was abandoning the fight entirely. He was initiating a massive rapid liquidation protocol. The dashboard showed Richard aggressively selling off massive tranches of his domestic stock portfolios. He was converting millions of dollars in joint tech investments, the capital he shared with my mother, into raw liquid cash. "He is draining the domestic portfolios," Marcus noted, his voice tight with alarm. "He is trying to secure the liquid capital before a judge can freeze the marital assets." But he was not routing the cash into a standard checking account. I watched the digital breadcrumbs forming a terrifying, recognizable pattern. Richard was attempting to transfer the liquidated millions into the exact same offshore cryptocurrency exchange Vanessa utilized to manage her holding company. "He is not just hiding the money," I realized, a cold sense of dread settling in my chest. "He is converting the capital into untraceable digital assets. He is preparing to flee the country with Vanessa, and he is taking my mother's entire remaining fortune with him." The conflict morphed instantly into a chaotic, high-speed digital chase. Richard was attempting to ghost us, leaving Sarah entirely destitute, while he escaped to a jurisdiction without extradition treaties. If those millions hit the decentralized blockchain, the money would be permanently unrecoverable. The clock was ticking, and I had to deploy a countermeasure capable of stopping a multi-million-dollar offshore crypto transfer before my father vanished into the digital ether. The progress bar on my monitoring dashboard crept forward, marking the frantic conversion of $5 million in blue-chip tech stocks into volatile liquid cash. Richard was executing the fire sale with reckless speed, absorbing massive early withdrawal penalties and market losses just to get the capital out of the traditional domestic banking system. He did not care about the lost value. He only cared about escaping the impending federal subpoenas. "He is moving the liquidity into the staging accounts," Marcus observed, pacing tightly behind my chair. "Once that cash clears the staging protocol, he will push it directly to the offshore crypto exchange. If it hits the decentralized ledger, we lose visibility. The money vanishes into a digital black hole, and Sarah is left with absolutely nothing." I cracked my knuckles, my eyes locked on the rapidly updating terminal. "We cannot fight an offshore crypto exchange using standard civil injunctions." I explained, my voice tight with urgent focus. "Those exchanges operate outside United States jurisdiction. They routinely ignore local court orders. We need to deploy a weapon that forces international compliance. We need federal regulatory intervention. I am a cybersecurity analyst, not a federal agent. I do not possess the authority to unilaterally freeze a financial transfer." But my career required maintaining a robust network of industry contacts, including liaisons within federal regulatory bodies who specialized in monitoring illicit digital financial movements. I opened a secure encrypted communication channel, bypassing standard email protocols. I drafted an urgent high-priority alert directed to a specific contact I collaborated with previously at the Securities and Exchange Commission Cybercrimes Division. I did not send a vague complaint. I provided a meticulous, lethal data package. I attached the forged real estate deeds, the metadata proving the commercial developer's complicity, and the sworn confession from the corrupt concierge doctor outlining the $50,000 bribery scheme. I painted a pristine, undeniable picture of an executive currently attempting to launder stolen assets to evade imminent criminal prosecution. I hit send, launching the digital flare into the federal ether. The response was not immediate. The agonizing minutes ticked by as Richard's cash began transferring into the final staging accounts, preparing for the jump to the offshore crypto wallets. The progress bar hovered at 70%. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to crack them. If the federal agents did not act decisively, my mother would wake up on that leather sofa completely bankrupt. Suddenly, a new window popped open on my terminal, displaying a secure direct chat request from my SEC contact. Data package received and authenticated the message. Read the terse clinical text belying the massive bureaucratic machinery swinging into motion behind the scenes. "We are initiating emergency containment protocols. Provide real-time routing node access immediately." I bypassed my own monitoring interface, establishing a secure direct data bridge between my tracking software and the Federal Cyber Crimes Unit. I handed them the digital roadmap, guiding them through the complex web of shell companies Richard was utilizing to mask the transfer. I watched the terminal screens, holding my breath as the federal authorities engaged the target. The progress bar on Richard's transfer halted abruptly at 89%. The screen flashed a sudden warning status. The routing nodes turned from a flowing green to a harsh, locked red. The domestic holding accounts connecting Richard's liquid cash to the offshore crypto exchange were instantaneously frozen. The SEC did not just send a polite inquiry. Armed with undeniable proof of a massive coordinated fraud conspiracy, they executed a sweeping federal asset freeze. They locked down Richard's entire digital financial portfolio mid-transfer. The $5 million was trapped, suspended in a bureaucratic purgatory entirely inaccessible to my father. "We got him," I whispered, a profound sense of relief washing over my exhaustion. "The escape route is dead. He is paralyzed." Marcus let out a sharp, victorious laugh, clapping me firmly on the shoulder. "You just grounded a private jet using a laptop, Isabella. He is officially trapped in California." The federal asset freeze functioned as a massive digital distress beacon, signaling to anyone connected to Richard that he was now radioactive. Federal agencies do not quietly freeze $5 million. The maneuver triggered automatic compliance alerts across the entire financial sector, instantly notifying any partnered commercial entities that Richard was under severe federal scrutiny. The ripple effect of that action was immediate and brutal. My phone buzzed on the mahogany table, vibrating violently. It was an incoming call from a blocked number. The caller ID was masked, indicating a highly secure unlisted line. I answered the call, putting the device on speakerphone so Marcus could hear the conversation. Isabella Jones, a deep, gravelly voice, demanded, bypassing any polite introduction. "Speaking," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "My name is not important," the man stated, his voice radiating a cold, dangerous corporate authority. "But I represent the commercial development firm attempting to purchase the Sonoma property. The corrupt developer who smirked at me in the VIP cabana just hours ago was calling me directly. The arrogant bravado was entirely gone, replaced by a lethal, panicked urgency. Your father just triggered a massive federal asset freeze." The developer continued, his tone dripping with venom. "The SEC just flagged our associated holding companies. Richard is a massive toxic liability, and we are violently backing out of this entire disastrous arrangement. The real estate deal is officially dead. We are not touching that vineyard." "I expected that," I replied calmly, leaning back in my chair. "You recognize the federal indictments are coming, and you are trying to cut your ties before you get dragged into the conspiracy." "I am calling to deliver a message," the developer stated, ignoring my comment. "You can pass this along to your father and his little protégée, Vanessa." The mention of my half-sister sent a fresh chill down my spine. We paid Vanessa a very substantial, non-refundable crypto kickback to expedite the zoning permits and secure the forged deed the developer revealed, pulling the curtain back on the true depth of their corruption. We paid for a clean, quiet acquisition. Since Richard and Vanessa failed to deliver and instead brought the federal government to our doorstep, we require an immediate refund. He paused, letting the heavy threat hang in the air. "Tell Vanessa she has exactly 24 hours to return the kickback in full," the developer warned, his voice dropping into a harsh, menacing register. "We are not a bank, Isabella. We do not file civil lawsuits for breach of contract. If we do not see the crypto returned to our wallets by tomorrow morning, the consequences for her and your father will be severe and highly physical." The line disconnected abruptly, leaving the dial tone echoing in the quiet conference room. The conflict mutated once again, taking a sharp, terrifying turn. The legal battles and the digital espionage were suddenly overshadowed by the threat of genuine physical violence. Richard and Vanessa were no longer just facing federal prison and financial ruin. They were cornered by ruthless corporate predators, demanding the return of bribe money that was likely currently locked behind the SEC asset freeze. The toxic loyalty binding my father and his secret daughter was about to undergo the ultimate stress test. When cornered by dangerous enemies and facing total destruction, arrogant criminals rarely stand together. They turn on each other, seeking a desperate, selfish survival. And the betrayal I was about to witness between Richard and Vanessa would prove more devastating than anything they had done to me. The severed connection with the commercial developer left a heavy, chilling silence in the conference room. I stared at the disconnected call screen, the sheer reality of the threat settling over me. The developer did not speak in vague legal hypotheticals. He promised severe physical retaliation against Vanessa and Richard if the massive crypto kickback was not returned within 24 hours. The insulated, affluent world of Silicon Valley venture capitalism had collided violently with the ruthless reality of unregulated shadow markets. Marcus, who had been listening to the entire exchange on speakerphone, let out a low whistle, rubbing the back of his neck. "They are playing with fire," Marcus noted, his voice grim. The federal asset freeze locked down Richard's entire domestic portfolio. He cannot access the $5 million he tried to move. He is completely paralyzed. Which means, I said, my mind rapidly connecting the tactical dots, Vanessa is holding the only remaining liquid assets. When Richard established the offshore shell company to shelter the Sonoma vineyard, he granted Vanessa full administrative control over those specific accounts. It was a maneuver designed to shield the assets from marital property division during his impending divorce from my mother. He trusted his secret daughter, implicitly assuming her loyalty was an unshakable guarantee. But loyalty built on deceit and stolen wealth is inherently fragile. When cornered by dangerous predators demanding immediate restitution, that fragile bond snaps. I turned back to my monitoring dashboard, keeping a relentless digital watch on the offshore shell company accounts. I expected to see a frantic transfer initiated by Vanessa, returning the massive crypto bribe directly to the angry developers to save her own skin. Instead, I watched a completely different, highly coordinated digital maneuver unfold. A red authorization flag blinked rapidly on my screen, indicating a major withdrawal request originating from Vanessa's administrative profile. But the routing destination was not the commercial developer's wallet. "She is not paying them back," I announced, my voice tight with disbelief, leaning closer to the monitor. "She is draining the shell company entirely." Vanessa was executing a ruthless, selfish survival protocol. She recognized that the commercial developer was a lethal threat, and she knew Richard was hopelessly trapped by the federal government. She realized that staying in California meant facing either physical violence from the developers or a massive federal indictment for wire fraud and conspiracy. She decided to abandon the sinking ship. She initiated a sweeping transfer, attempting to consolidate the massive crypto kickback, the remaining operational funds from the shell company, and the last scattered reserves of Richard's hidden offshore wealth into a single decentralized private wallet. She was taking everything, intending to leave her father behind, to face the catastrophic consequences alone, while she vanished into the international ether. The devoted, loving protégé who proudly accepted my father's toast at the Napa Valley restaurant was currently robbing him blind. I watched the digital betrayal execute in real time, feeling a profound, grim sense of poetic justice. Richard had systematically dismantled his 35-year marriage, destroying my mother and attempting to ruin my career, all to build an empire for his secret daughter. And that very daughter was currently leaving him entirely destitute to save herself. "We cannot let her walk away with that capital," Marcus urged, stepping up beside my chair. "That money represents the punitive damages and the stolen equity your mother deserves. If Vanessa secures that private wallet, we will never recover a single dime." "I am not going to let her walk away," I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced lethal precision. "She is utilizing the same sloppy routing protocols my father used. She thinks she is invisible because she is operating offshore." I intercepted the authorization request mid-transit, deploying a highly specialized digital spoofing maneuver. When Vanessa's administrative profile requested the final confirmation to release the funds, I hijacked the destination routing code. I did not block the transfer. Blocking it would simply alert her to my presence, allowing her to try a different avenue. I altered the receiving coordinates. "Marcus, provide the routing numbers for your firms. Secure court-mandated escrow account," I demanded, keeping my eyes locked on the scrolling data. Marcus rattled off the complex series of numbers and routing identifiers. I inputted the data, seamlessly swapping Vanessa's private, decentralized wallet address for the highly regulated ironclad escrow account managed by Marcus and his legal team. I hit execute. The progress bar on the offshore transfer zoomed to 100%. The massive sum of illicit cryptocurrency and hidden cash officially vanished from Vanessa's shell company. But it did not land in her private wallet. The funds slammed directly into the secure escrow account, landing with a definitive digital thud. The capital was instantaneously locked down, protected by stringent federal banking regulations and requiring a direct judicial order to release. The money was legally quarantined, securing the necessary funds for my mother's ultimate financial restitution. Vanessa was currently staring at an empty private wallet, realizing she had just handed her entire stolen fortune directly to the attorneys representing the family she tried to destroy. She was trapped in California, entirely penniless, with angry commercial developers hunting her down. I sat back in my chair, letting out a long, shaky breath. The frantic, high-stakes digital warfare was finally over. We had secured the vineyard, shattered the medical conservatorship, frozen the escape funds, and intercepted the remaining offshore capital. The fortress Richard built had been completely obliterated. The silence in the conference room was broken by the sharp, harsh vibration of my mobile phone resting on the mahogany table. I glanced at the caller identification. It was Richard. I stared at the screen, the name pulsing in the dimly lit room. The arrogant, ruthless tech investor who had confidently toasted my replacement just a few days ago was calling me at 4 a.m. I knew exactly why he was calling. The offshore accounts were empty. The federal freeze was active. The developers were threatening violence, and the daughter he sacrificed everything for had just attempted to abandon him. He was completely out of options. I picked up the phone, accepting the call, and pressing it slowly to my ear. Isabella Richards' voice was barely recognizable. It was a pathetic, frantic wheeze stripped entirely of its booming corporate authority. He was weeping. The powerful patriarch was openly sobbing into the phone, the sound echoing with profound, desperate despair. "Isabella, please," he begged, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of his ruined life. "She took everything. Vanessa drained the accounts. She left me here. The developers are threatening me. The feds locked my portfolios. I have nothing. You have to help me. You know the digital systems. You know how to track her. Please, you are my daughter. I need your help." He had the sheer, stunning audacity to invoke my title as his daughter only after his secret protégé betrayed him. He spent my entire life belittling my career, and he actively tried to destroy my reputation with a vicious smear campaign just 48 hours ago. Now facing total annihilation, he was begging the invisible working-class cybersecurity analyst to save him from the monster he created. I listened to his desperate, pathetic sobs, maintaining a cold, analytical silence. The cycle of emotional manipulation and toxic loyalty was officially broken. I possessed the power to intervene, to offer legal guidance, or attempt to negotiate with the commercial developers on his behalf. I held his salvation in my hands, and I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I listened to the frantic, desperate sobbing of my father for precisely 10 seconds. He offered no genuine apologies for the devastation he orchestrated. He expressed no remorse for forging my mother's signature or attempting to ruin my professional career. He only wept because the consequences of his arrogance had finally arrived at his doorstep, and the golden daughter he built his new life around had abandoned him the moment the foundation cracked. "You raised your glass to the daughter who never disappointed you," I said, my voice cold, flat, and entirely devoid of pity. "Call her." I ended the call, severing the connection without waiting for his response. I placed the phone face down on the mahogany conference table. I did not feel a shred of guilt or lingering familial obligation. The man on the other end of the line was not my father. He was a hostile threat actor attempting a final desperate social engineering maneuver, and I had officially neutralized his access. The frantic digital espionage operation was complete, but the formal legal execution remained. Marcus filed an expedited motion for a final evidentiary hearing, leveraging the overwhelming, undeniable data we had secured over the grueling weekend. The San Francisco Superior Court recognized the severe nature of the mounting federal crimes and scheduled an immediate emergency session. The morning of the hearing arrived with a heavy, thick fog rolling off the San Francisco Bay, blanketing the downtown legal district in a fittingly gloomy atmosphere. I walked into the grand, historic courtroom alongside Sarah and Marcus, feeling a profound, steady calm. My mother looked transformed. The fragile, passive woman who wept quietly at a Napa Valley restaurant was gone. Sarah walked with her head held high, wearing a sharp, tailored blazer, projecting the quiet, unyielding dignity of a woman reclaiming her generational legacy. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table, arranging the thick, pristine dossiers containing the irrefutable digital footprints we had meticulously compiled. Richard and Vanessa were compelled to appear via mandatory subpoena. They walked down the center aisle, flanked by their respective expensive defense attorneys, but they did not walk together. The toxic loyalty that bound them had violently shattered. Richard looked completely ruined. He wore a wrinkled suit, his face pale and unshaven, lacking the booming, arrogant confidence that defined his entire existence. He sat at the far edge of the defense table, refusing to look anywhere near my mother or me. Vanessa sat at the opposite end of the table, maintaining as much physical distance from Richard as possible. The stolen vintage diamond necklace was conspicuously absent from her neck. She looked terrified, her eyes darting nervously toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the gallery, likely anticipating the arrival of the angry commercial developers or federal agents. The two traitors who conspired to destroy our family could not even bear to make eye contact with each other. The bailiff called the room to order as the Honorable Judge Evelyn Torres took her seat at the elevated bench. Judge Torres was a veteran of the Superior Court, known for her sharp intellect and profound intolerance for wealthy litigants attempting to manipulate her courtroom. We are here to review the final evidentiary submissions regarding the contested transfer of the Sonoma Vineyard property and the associated emergency civil injunctions, Judge Torres announced, adjusting her reading glasses. The court recognizes counsel for the plaintiff. You may proceed. Marcus stood up, buttoning his suit jacket and radiating the lethal focus of a litigator holding an unbeatable hand. He did not waste time with emotional appeals or lengthy opening statements. He relied entirely on the cold, hard data. Your Honor, the defense previously attempted to frame this dispute as a tragic misunderstanding, claiming my client required emergency medical conservatorship. Marcus began, his voice echoing clearly across the quiet room. They presented a psychiatric evaluation signed by Dr. Lawrence Sterling. Marcus handed a specialized digital tablet to the bailiff, who delivered it directly to the judge. We submit Plaintiff's Exhibit A, Marcus continued. This exhibit contains verified geographical metadata extracted from Dr. Sterling's personal social media accounts. The data proves unequivocally that Dr. Sterling was actively vacationing at a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, at the exact minute he supposedly conducted an in-person psychiatric evaluation of my client in Palo Alto, California. Judge Torres swiped through the high-resolution images and the embedded coordinate data on the tablet. Her expression darkened, settling into a mask of pure judicial fury. She recognized instantly that a prominent physician had committed blatant perjury in her jurisdiction. Furthermore, Marcus added, projecting a new set of data onto the large courtroom monitor. We have secured a formal written confession from Dr. Sterling, officially retracting the evaluation and admitting he accepted a $50,000 cash bribe from Richard Jones to falsify the medical record. A collective gasp rippled through the small gallery. Richard slumped lower in his chair, burying his face in his hands, recognizing that his final desperate defense was completely obliterated on the public record. But Marcus was not finished. He pivoted seamlessly to the mechanics of the real estate theft. We submit Plaintiff's Exhibit B, Marcus announced, handing a secondary folder to the bailiff. This dossier contains the digital routing metadata capturing the exact moment the forged deed to the Sonoma Vineyard was executed. The data proves the signature was not authenticated on a secure private network. It was executed utilizing a static IP address registered exclusively to the corporate headquarters of the commercial development firm attempting to purchase the land. The defense attorneys shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing their clients were actively implicating prominent corporate entities in a massive federal fraud conspiracy. Richard Jones did not simply forge a document, Marcus declared, pacing slowly in front of the bench. He colluded directly with the commercial developers to secure the property below market value, executing the forgery, utilizing their secure network infrastructure. Marcus stopped, turning his piercing gaze toward Vanessa. And finally, Your Honor, we submit Exhibit C. This contains the intercepted wire routing requests initiated by Vanessa Santos. Recognizing the impending collapse of their conspiracy, Ms. Santos attempted to drain the remaining stolen trust capital and massive illicit crypto bribes into a private, untraceable offshore wallet, intending to flee the jurisdiction and abandon her co-conspirator. Vanessa let out a small, terrified sob, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. The illusion of the brilliant, devoted protégé was entirely dead. She was exposed as a ruthless, desperate thief, turning on her own father the moment the pressure became unbearable. Judge Torres removed her glasses, resting her hands flat on the elevated bench. She surveyed the devastated figure sitting at the defense table, her expression radiating profound judicial disgust. This court presides over many complex and bitter family disputes. Judge Torres stated, her voice cutting through the heavy silence like a razor. But the actions detailed in this courtroom today transcend simple marital dysfunction. You orchestrated a calculated predatory conspiracy. You bribed a state-licensed medical professional attempting to strip your wife of her fundamental human rights simply to execute a real estate heist. You colluded with corrupt commercial developers, and you attempted to launder the proceeds across international lines. The judge picked up her wooden gavel, her grip tight and resolute. I am issuing an immediate binding judicial order restoring the deed of the Sonoma Vineyard exclusively to Sarah Jones. Judge Torres ruled, striking the sounding block with a loud, definitive crack. The fraudulent transfer is entirely nullified. Furthermore, to satisfy the immense punitive damages generated by this malicious fiduciary breach, I am ordering the total liquidation of all remaining domestic joint assets held by Richard Jones. The entirety of those funds shall be remanded to the plaintiff. The civil victory was absolute. Sarah recovered her generational legacy and secured the financial resources required to rebuild her life entirely free from Richard's domineering shadow. But the judge was not finished. However, Judge Torres continued raising her voice, ensuring every word landed heavily on the official transcript. The mechanics of your actions have crossed severe jurisdictional thresholds. The perjury, the medical fraud, and the interstate digital wire transfers utilized to execute this theft require a much heavier, broader response. Richard froze, his bloodshot eyes widening in sheer panic. Therefore, Judge Torres declared, I am legally obligated to refer the entirety of this proceeding to the proper federal authorities. I am directing the court clerk to forward the official transcripts, the impounded metadata, and the sworn medical confessions directly to the United States Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation. Vanessa let out a loud, hysterical wail, dropping her head onto the polished wooden table. I am also requesting the immediate detainment of Richard Jones and Vanessa Santos, pending formal federal indictment citing severe flight risk due to their established history of manipulating offshore digital assets. Judge Torres concluded, striking the gavel a final time. Bailiffs take the defendants into custody. 2 armed bailiffs moved swiftly down the center aisle, approaching the defense table. The metallic clink of handcuffs echoed sharply through the quiet courtroom as they secured Richard's wrists behind his back. The booming, arrogant tech investor was reduced to a weeping, terrified old man, ruined by the stroke of a gavel. Richard turned his head as the bailiffs pulled him to his feet. He looked across the aisle, locking eyes with me one final time. His expression pleaded for a sliver of sympathy, a final desperate appeal to the daughter he spent his entire life belittling. I did not offer him a sympathetic nod. I did not show an ounce of pity. I simply reached forward, closed my silver laptop with a sharp, definitive click, and turned my back, walking away without uttering a single word. The legal execution was complete, but the social and corporate fallout radiating from the courtroom would soon shatter the remaining fragments of their pristine Silicon Valley lives. The speed at which the federal authorities mobilized was staggering. They did not drag their feet or bury the judicial referral in bureaucratic paperwork. When a sitting Superior Court magistrate hands a United States attorney a pristine box of digital evidence containing forged IP addresses, intercepted wire traces, and a signed confession of medical bribery, they act with lethal immediacy. The legal machinery churned into high gear, transforming a private family dispute into a devastating, high-profile public spectacle. Within 3 weeks, a federal grand jury convened in San Francisco. They reviewed the encrypted dossiers, exposing the systematic laundering of stolen trust capital and the blatant forgery utilized to secure the Sonoma Vineyard. The evidence was irrefutable. Richard, the booming, arrogant tech investor, and Vanessa, his secret golden child, were officially indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate espionage, and perjury. The story hit the local news cycle like a localized earthquake. Richard's mugshot appeared on the front page of the Silicon Valley Business Journal. The accompanying article detailed the staggering scale of the real estate scam, highlighting his betrayal of his wife and the shocking revelation of his hidden 25-year-old daughter. The local television stations ran evening segments covering the scandal, broadcasting the implosion of the prominent tech executive across the entire California coast. The social fallout was instant and ruthless. The affluent Palo Alto community that Richard spent decades cultivating evaporated overnight. High society and venture capitalists are exceptionally unforgiving when one of their own gets caught executing sloppy federal felonies that attract the scrutiny of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The prestigious country clubs revoked his memberships, citing severe moral turpitude clauses in their bylaws. The very tech executives and socialite friends who had actively participated in Richard's initial smear campaign against me completely turned their backs on him. The people who sent frantic anonymous tips to my HR department, attempting to destroy my career, now scrambled to delete his phone number, avoiding his desperate calls like a highly contagious disease. They were terrified that any ongoing association with Richard would draw the relentless gaze of federal subpoenas toward their own questionable business practices. The legal consequences, however, could not be ignored by simply avoiding public appearances. Richard and Vanessa required elite criminal defense teams to fight the looming federal indictments. The retainer fees demanded by attorneys willing to handle such a complex, toxic, high-profile case were astronomical. Because Judge Torres had stripped Richard of his joint marital assets to satisfy the massive punitive damages awarded to my mother, he had no cash reserves left to mount a proper legal defense. He was backed into a devastating financial corner, forced to liquidate the very symbol of his status and arrogance. Richard listed his personal shares in his booming tech investment firm on the secondary market. He needed the cash quickly, so he could not afford the luxury of negotiating a premium valuation. With the heavy federal indictments actively encumbering his reputation potential, buyers smelled blood in the water. He slashed his asking price repeatedly, trying to unload the massive equity before the legal bills buried him completely. A rival investment group eventually purchased his shares at a brutal, steep discount, securing his pristine portfolio for nearly 40% below its actual market value. The proceeds from the hasty sale barely covered his mounting legal debts. Richard packed up his imported Italian suits, his custom golf clubs, and his expensive vintage watches. He was evicted from the sprawling modern estate in Palo Alto, handing the keys entirely over to Sarah as part of the finalized divorce decree. He moved out of the affluent, shaded streets of the valley and signed a lease on a cramped, noisy apartment located in a gritty industrial suburb far away from the glittering world he used to rule. Vanessa experienced her own distinct brand of purgatory. The authorities executed a search warrant on her luxury condominium, seizing the vintage diamond necklace she brazenly wore during our coffee shop confrontation. The priceless heirloom was officially catalogued as stolen property and securely returned to my mother's possession. Vanessa faced her own separate fraud charges, isolated and abandoned by the father who brought her into his toxic web. Furthermore, the corrupt commercial developer who smirked at me in the VIP cabana faced his own catastrophic reckoning. The digital metadata proving his corporate network facilitated the forged deed triggered a massive federal raid on his Los Angeles headquarters. The board of directors ousted him from his firm, immediately attempting to salvage the company reputation. He was subjected to a grueling, invasive SEC probe, ensuring he would never wield influence in the California real estate market again. The Sonoma vineyard was permanently secure from any future corporate predators. I watched the entire collapse unfold from a safe, healthy distance. I did not experience a single ounce of guilt or regret. I did not shed any tears for the arrogant man who was currently learning how to navigate life in a tiny, noisy apartment. He built the exact circumstances of his ruin. He dug the hole, he handed Vanessa the shovel, and they threw themselves inside when the ground finally collapsed. I felt only a profound, quiet sense of closure. With my professional reputation pristine and my security clearance securely intact, my career trajectory soared. The corporate board at my cybersecurity firm, recognizing the sheer lethal precision I deployed to dismantle a federal conspiracy, promoted me to a senior director role. I successfully utilized my occupational expertise not just to defend faceless corporate networks, but to protect my family and break a generational cycle of deceit. On a bright, crisp Saturday morning, I stood in the driveway of the Palo Alto estate, helping Sarah load the final few travel bags into the trunk of my car. The heavy, suffocating tension that haunted the property for 35 years had completely lifted. My mother looked radiant, wearing a comfortable linen shirt and projecting the quiet, confident aura of a woman who had reclaimed her own destiny. We climbed into the car, and I pointed the vehicle north, merging onto the winding, breathtaking curves of the Pacific Coast Highway. We drove with the windows rolled down, letting the salty ocean breeze wash over us. The dark, oppressive clouds of my father's deceit were finally clearing, giving way to a brilliant, unobstructed future. We were heading toward the Sonoma Vineyard, not as victims fighting a desperate defensive war, but as the undisputed owners returning to tend to our ancestral roots. 6 months passed. The coastal fog of San Francisco gave way to the crisp golden sunlight of the Sonoma Valley. The rolling hills were blanketed in vibrant green vines, heavy with ripening grapes. Sarah stood on the wraparound wooden porch of the ancestral estate, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. She wore sturdy denim jeans and a wide-brimmed sun hat, looking nothing like the fragile, shrinking socialite from Palo Alto. She had assumed full operational control of the vineyard, diving into the soil and the harvest with a fierce, joyful energy. Her newfound independence mirrored the blooming vines stretching across the acreage. She spent her mornings walking the rows, inspecting the grapes, and negotiating distribution contracts with local wineries. She was no longer a silent shadow. She was a powerhouse vintner, reclaiming her birthright. I sat at a rustic wooden table on the outdoor patio, typing quietly on my silver laptop. The promotion to senior cybersecurity director granted me the leverage to dictate my own operational schedule. I spent 3 days a week working remotely from the wine country, breathing in the clean air and listening to the quiet rustle of the ancient oak trees. My professional reputation remained immaculate and unshakable. The corporate board trusted my judgment implicitly, knowing I possessed the tactical grit to dismantle a federal conspiracy without breaking a sweat. I spent my morning patching server vulnerabilities for a major financial client, protecting their digital infrastructure with the same fierce loyalty I used to protect my mother. My career was no longer a disappointing punchline at a dinner table. It was the impenetrable shield that guarded our lives. As the afternoon shifted into a breathtaking twilight, we prepared to host a celebration. We set a long, reclaimed wood table under the sprawling branches of a centuries-old oak tree, stringing warm yellow fairy lights through the green canopy. The menu featured a true farm-to-table feast, consisting of locally sourced roasted vegetables, fresh Pacific seafood caught that morning, and our own vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. We did not invite affluent venture capitalists or shallow socialites who treated loyalty like a disposable commodity. We surrounded ourselves with genuine friends, trusted colleagues, and the people who stood by us when the storm was at its darkest. The air smelled of wood smoke and sweet wine. Marcus drove up from Los Angeles, attending the dinner as our guest of honor. He traded his sharp litigation suits for a comfortable linen shirt, holding a glass of dark red wine and laughing warmly at a joke told by my department lead. The atmosphere was light, unburdened by the toxic pretension that suffocated our former lives. After the main course was cleared, Marcus walked over to my end of the table carrying a sleek leather folder. He placed it down next to my empty plate, a familiar sharp grin spreading across his face. He explained that the federal authorities had officially scheduled Richard's sentencing hearing for the following month. Richard was facing a mandatory minimum sentence for his role in the wire fraud and perjury schemes. But Marcus did not drive all the way to Sonoma just to deliver a scheduling update. He came to deliver the final executed corporate documents. When the judge ordered Richard to pay the staggering punitive damages, he was forced to hastily liquidate his founder shares in his own tech investment firm. He sold his equity at a steep, brutal discount to a faceless rival investment group acting through an anonymous corporate proxy. He believed he was simply losing money to a random competitor in a desperate bid to cover his legal fees. Marcus opened the leather folder, revealing the finalized corporate registry and the official stock transfer certificates. The faceless rival investment group was actually a blind trust. And that blind trust was funded entirely by the punitive damages Richard paid to my mother. Marcus had quietly orchestrated the proxy purchase on my behalf, shielding our identities behind layers of legal corporate routing. I stared at the signature line, realizing the sheer profound gravity of the paper resting on the table. I did not just defeat my father in court. I used his own penalty money to buy his liquidated equity. I was now the majority shareholder of the tech empire he built. He sat at my 30th birthday dinner, toasted my replacement, and mocked my career. In response, I legally acquired his entire corporate legacy for pennies on the dollar. He was unemployed, facing federal prison, and I owned the very firm that fired him. The poetic justice was so sharp and pristine it left me momentarily breathless. Sarah looked at the documents and let out a bright, genuine laugh, a sound I had not heard from her in over a decade. I looked out over the thriving vineyard, feeling a deep, profound sense of closure. I did not just save a piece of prime real estate. I protected my mother from financial ruin and broke free from a lifetime of emotional manipulation. I dismantled the invisible cage my father built around us, proving that grit and intelligence will always outmaneuver arrogant deceit. We stood in the light of the truth, while the people who tried to destroy us faded into the dark consequences of their own actions. My name is Isabella Jones. I am 30 years old, and I turned my father's betrayal into my own empire. If you are listening to this story and you find yourself constantly shrinking to fit the expectations of toxic relatives, I need you to hear this truth. You do not owe your sanity, your savings, or your future to people simply because you share a bloodline. Do not let anyone convince you that establishing digital or emotional boundaries is a betrayal of the family tree. Real family does not manipulate your assets to fund their secret lives. They do not exploit your strength or replace you when you no longer serve their vanity. True family respects your boundaries, celebrates your honest labor, and protects your peace. Know your worth and document everything, because liars will always try to rewrite history when the consequences show up at their door. Stand your ground even when your voice shakes, and never apologize for surviving the fire they ignited. If you have ever had to execute a hard reset on a toxic relationship, drop a comment below and share your story. Hit the like button, subscribe to Savage Revenge Stories, and remember that the best response to people who try to erase you is to build a reality they cannot ignore. I will see you in the next story.